Hello everyone and welcome to another edition of 5 Facts. Today we're taking on the 2007 crime thriller Zodiac. This is a David Fincher and James Vanderbilt film. It's based on the book Zodiac from cartoonist Robert Graysmith, who also is one of the main characters played by Jake Gyllenhaal. This film is an incredibly shot masterwork. It's really one of the better true crime movies that's out there. It's one of my favorites at least. It's a little bit long, but it's so detailed and just perfectly built. It's also interesting because even though it runs over 2.5 hours, it actually eschews most character backstory and just puts you right into the story. You can see elements about these characters by how they act, but they're not really established otherwise. It covers the story of the Zodiac killer, who was active in the late 60s and early 70s in the San Francisco Bay Area. He's a serial killer that was never captured, and to this day it remains a complete mystery. Anyway, let's get to the fact. Fact number 1. David Fincher was particularly drawn to this movie because he grew up where the Zodiac was operating. Although Fincher was originally planned to be the director of the Black Dahlia movie, the studio decided to go with Brian De Palma instead. The studio that was in charge of Zodiac actually had Fincher picked as their main person after seeing the work he did with Seven. They didn't know at the time that Fincher had actually grown up in San Anselmo and Marin County, which put him right in the center of all this whenever he was a child. David Fincher's father was never one to put things lightly. One morning he walked up to David as they were getting ready to go to the bus stop and said, "Oh yeah, there's a serial killer who's killed 4 or 5 people who calls himself Zodiac, who's threatened to take a high-powered rifle and shoot out the tires of a school bus and then shoot the children as they come off the bus." And then he just sent them off to school. After that, the Zodiac became the ultimate boogeyman for Fincher and would go on to influence a lot of his later work in films. Fact number 2. The attention to detail and facts was paramount in this production. Because the evidence was so old, the writers wanted to focus as much as they could on reliable evidence. They focused mostly on verifiable facts brought about by the police report and newspapers from the time. Even though they would go on to interview dozens and dozens of people who were witnesses, even like the old mayor of San Francisco when this was happening, they were very careful not to use anything that was conjecture. Many of the actual people involved in the Zodiac case said that their characters were done very well. David Toschi said that Mark Ruffalo did a great job, but the movie frustrated him because it brought about all the old tension and frustration that he had because he couldn't actually solve the case. They also wanted to spend a lot of time making sure that the only scenes they filmed were the ones that had actual survivors. That's why there's only 2 major killing scenes in this movie, despite there being more deaths. They wanted to make sure that when they reconstructed it, that it actually had that weight, that it was exactly as it happened. To do this, they actually had to hire a private investigator to find Mike Majou and Brian Hartnell. And basically, they turned them into consultants on the film. The only reason they agreed to this was after seeing how much research and how much time they were putting into it. They figured that this would be the final story that actually told the story of the Zodiac. Not like Dirty Harry, which was actually based on the Zodiac case. Fact number 3. The Lake Berryessa scene was carefully reconstructed to fit the forensic evidence. Because it fit into the filming schedule, they shot the scenes at Lake Berryessa on the same day of the year as the murder and attempted murder took place. Fincher had trees helicoptered in because the lake and the surrounding areas had changed a lot since the 60s. Knowing that this would take many, many shots, the blood in the scenes is actually done with CGI. The crew didn't want to have to keep on bringing in new versions of clothes for the actors during every take. It would just slow things down. You'd have to wipe them down for the blood that was already there, and it just was generally thought to be very time-consuming. The way they did it, though, it looks pretty good. Like, it's not 100%, but whenever you're in the moment, Also, in these scenes, these are some of the only parts of the movie that weren't shot digitally. They wanted to have better slow-motion angles, so they decided to go back to film. Fact number 4. The film was very careful to not outright claim who the Zodiac killer was. Because the case was never solved, Fincher and crew went to great lengths not to single out a single killer. Anytime the Zodiac is on screen, it's a different actor with a slightly different build. Although the film heavily implies that Arthur Lee Allen was the prime suspect, it's careful not to actually state this as fact. Other sequences, such as the terrifying basement scene with Bob Vaughn, was meant to imply that there were many suspects that could have been the Zodiac. On a side note, Charles Fleischer did an amazing job with this scene. You might know him a little bit better as the voice behind Roger Rabbit and various other cartoons, but he did an excellent job just making it so tense in this basement. Also, he's been a friend of Jake Gyllenhaal since Jake was 3 years old, so they have a long history going back there. In the actual case, more than 2,500 people were thought to be possible suspects. The film highlighted the ones with the most evidence, the ones that the police actually had picked as their favorite targets. Fact number 5. Popcorn facts. It's not that there wasn't a big thing that I wanted to talk about for the last fact on here, but there are a lot of little ones that are really interesting for this, so we're just going to pop off a few. David Fincher had animators add hair to Jake Gyllenhaal's knuckles during his close-ups. He felt that his hands were too pretty and soft to be on screen. Robert Graysmith, author of Zodiac and the main protagonist of this movie, only had one thing to say about it. God, I see why my wife divorced me. This film influenced a lot of movies at its time. I already mentioned Dirty Harry's killer Scorpio being based on Zodiac, but David Toschi was actually the inspiration behind Steve McQueen's classic Bullet. This was also like the reason why he would pose in certain ways. This is why the gun was holstered in a certain way. This all goes back to Bullet, which was taken from David Toschi in the beginning. Most of the images you see in this are from the actual case files. There are only a few that are doctored to show like younger versions of some of the actors. There are many scenes on this movie that took upwards of 90 takes to get complete. It was just over and over and over and grueling, and a lot of the actors didn't actually appreciate this. Robert Downey Jr. started hiding mason jars of urine all over the set because he felt like he didn't have time between scenes to be able to take care of his needs. If you remember the scene on the stairs where Graysmith and Toschi first meet, that was the 56th take, and that was the one they used for the movie. Sometimes it just takes time to tell a story. Lastly, upon meeting David Toschi, Mark Ruffalo was astounded that he had complete eidetic recall of his cases, meaning he had a photographic memory and remembered all the details of every case he's ever worked on. It's always fascinating to me the movies that will be big hits in the box office. This meticulously crafted mystery that took years to put together for just the research didn't even get close to making its budget back, scoring under $40 million for its $80 million budget. Then again, it is a film that breaks a lot of rules of modern mystery movies. None of the characters, much like in real life, get closure on the case. It's a movie that was so potent that the Zodiac case was reopened after it played. The amount of time spent crafting it and fine-tuning every detail was much like what Robert Graysmith had to endure when collecting evidence for his book. It's a movie that, for the average audience, probably ran a little bit too long and simply couldn't find its niche. It was advertised a little bit as a slasher, which is really not what this movie's about. If you're advertising a slasher, there needs to be a lot more of that happening. It needs to be a Saw movie or a Jason movie or something like that. And this is a lot more plotting than that. It wasn't a drama. It never had legs in the theaters. Even in its opening weekend, it lost out to Wild Hogs, the John Travolta movie. The only criticism I can even come up with for this movie is that the pacing was a little bit off. It wasn't that it was bad, it was just that they had a lot to say. They wanted to cover every angle. Sometimes it takes longer to really show you what's going on in a situation. Like this felt like it could have been a longer mini-series. It's still an important film, though. It was a film that was crass enough to stand on its own and not give the Hollywood ending. It's been highly lauded by critics. It's well loved by the audiences that it has found, and it really is worth your time if you haven't seen it. It is on Netflix right now if you want to check it out. What did you think of Zodiac? Did you feel like it did the case justice, or was it just too much talk and not enough action? If any of you have read the book by Robert Graysmith, I'd love to know how detailed it is and how well it worked out compared to this movie. If you liked this look at Zodiac, be sure to hit that like button and follow this channel. We put these out every 2 weeks, and we're getting ready to restart back at A. I'll be sending out what movie that is here shortly. Thank you all very much for listening. I hope you have a great day.